Welcome to the 8-Bit Instructor Podcast, a show dedicated to helping you level up your instruction in order to craft authentic learning experiences for both you and your students. I'm your host, Lee Tucker, a high school English teacher and ed tech enthusiast, and I want to join you on your journey to becoming the best instructor that you possibly can. So if you're ready, grab your adventuring gear and let's get going. Hey, what's up, 8-Bit crew? Today's Thursday, September 17th, 2020, and this is episode 8 of the 8-Bit Instructor Podcast. Thanks for joining me today. Later on, we're going to learn how to integrate some technology and take a look at some different ways you can use Google Forms and by extension Google Sheets to help save you time in class for both students and you personally. I've got a little bit of feedback from last week's question of the week that we'll look at and then take a look at this week's question of the week. And then in a bit, we'll open up the treasure chest and find some new gold nuggets of wisdom. But first, we'll take a look at some news and updates. It is halfway through September. We are rolling along in this school year. And it's, well, you guys are involved in this. You know what this school year is like. It's weird. It's crazy. But we're making it through. Hang in there, keep working, keep doing your best, and that's all we can do, right? Now, as far as some updates, there's a few Google updates that I wanted to go through. The first is a Google Docs update. Something it's pretty simple, nothing big, but it is an interesting update. In Google Docs, the line spacing now is going to be adjusted based on font. And if any of you have messed with different fonts, different sizes before, you know, sometimes the spacing between lines, if you have some of those bigger fonts that are taller, they can kind of overlap. So instead of basing it on the font size, the Google Docs is going to now look at the individual font itself to do the spacing. And this will just be for some newer fonts. So if you're a font person that likes to try out lots of different things, that's probably some good news for you. In some Google Groups news, the new Google Groups interface is now going to be the default setting rather than the older version of it. So the new Google Groups came out earlier this year, but administrators could turn that setting off. So if you've been using Google Groups, there's a chance that you may have been using the old version. I haven't used Google Groups a ton, but it is a good way of doing some like discussion, collaborative types of work. And so starting on September 15th, they made the new version of that the default. And it's supposed to just make things a lot easier. It's more efficient, more streamlined for the users. And it's supposed to just be a better look at Google Groups. And I can't say Google Groups. That's really hard to say. But I haven't checked it out. I'm probably going to look into it moving forward now. But if you are a Google Group user, then make sure you check that out. Starting this week, the new version of Groups will be the default. The last bit of Google news is something that I'm really excited about, but it doesn't really have a lot to do with education, and that is Android 11. Android 11 has finally arrived, and it is available for Android devices. It's rolling out. I downloaded it last night and checked it out. It's got some really great features. I won't bother you with all of the details, but a couple of the things in there that I really like. There is now a built-in screen recorder. It's similar to, I guess, what iOS did, where you don't have to have another app to do it. You can just do it right there in the phone. If you use any kind of smart devices, smart speakers, the Ring doorbell, Nest doorbell, anything like that, there's easier access to utilize those when you hold down the power button. So it makes things a lot easier. They've redone some of the media controls to make them a little bit more user-friendly. There's some new privacy data settings in there that are helpful. So just, those standard new updates that are always really cool to see. But I'm really excited. I have a Google Pixel, so I always love getting those new Android updates. But don't think that I'm a Android Google snob. I use iOS products as well. So I'm not on one side or the other. I just use what works really well. But that is pretty much it for news and updates this week. Not a whole lot going on out there. And so that will take us to a new treasure chest for this week. So let's open it up, take a look and see what's inside. The tip this week that I'm pulling out of the treasure chest is a Google Docs trick that is hiding away kind of in plain sight. Some of you may know about it, some of you may not know about it, and that is voice typing. So Google Docs has the ability for you to record voice typing, and it transcribes it into the Google Doc itself. So all you need is some kind of microphone, and just you enable it. And then if you go into the tools menu and look down, you'll see voice typing. And when you click on that, a little microphone box is going to appear, and when you're ready to speak, you just click the microphone and it starts recording. And it's surprisingly accurate. So it's a good way to get a lot of stuff typed out pretty quickly. We talk faster than we type typically. So if you're trying to get through something pretty quickly, you can use the voice typing to get through it and then go back through and edit it. And it's not just words, so you can do punctuation, you can do new lines to add new paragraphs. You can also do the same thing in Google Slides in the speaker notes. So you can't do voice typing on the slide itself, but a little trick there, if you click down into the speaker notes and then do voice type in speaker notes, you could just do the same thing and then copy and paste that stuff into your slides. So I've encouraged my students to do it because it's a really good way for them to quickly get a draft done, and we can spend more time doing the revisions and edits and making it sound really better. So if you've not used voice typing, it's a great little trick that's tucked in there in that tools menu. Check it out yourself. Let your students know about it. It's something that could definitely save a lot of time, which is what this week's boss battle is about. So we're going to wrap this up, and then we're going to head on over into the arena and work on leveling up next. So today's boss battle is largely based on a blog entry that I wrote a while back, but it's also very much connected to an issue that I've been focusing on this year, and maybe you have too, and that issue is the issue of time. I don't know about you, but it just seems like I have not had enough time this year to get everything done that I need to get done. And it's not that I'm misusing it, and it's not even really necessarily that I don't have enough given to me. It's just more that in the current circumstance, when I'm teaching multiple classes and we're doing online as well as in person, it just kind of multiplies the time that it takes to do things often. And so what I want to look at today is how we can use Google Forms and by extension Google Sheets to try to save some time with the things that we do in class and for our class. We're not always talking about huge, giant time savers, but as you'll see as I get in further with this, that sometimes saving 5 or 10 seconds here or there can really add up. So when we're talking about something like making parent contacts, if I'm saving 5 seconds with a parent email, but I'm emailing 100 parents, that time will add up. So what we're going to take a look at is 5 different ways that you can use Google Forms to help you out in class and hopefully save you a good deal of time. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. The first one is actually a really common one, and it's some that you might have actually used before, and that's just using Google Forms to do quizzes and assessments for your students. Now, I know a lot of you probably already have programs and things like that you use for assessments, for quizzes, for tests, and all that, but I did want to run through and talk about some of the features that Google Forms offers for assessment that can be helpful. It might have some features that whatever you use doesn't have. So especially now with the way that it is connected into Google Classroom, it's really easy to create quizzes with Google Forms. If you're in Google Classrooms, when you create a new assignment, there's now an option under the Create button to create a quiz assignment. And what that will do is it will create an assignment that already has a Google form attached in quiz mode. But what about some of the other features? So one of the things that I like is that Forms has a variety of options for the types of questions. You can do multiple choice, obviously, and then there's the short and long answer, but you can use something like checkboxes for multiple answers if you want them to select more than one answer. There are some matrix kind of answers. There's a scale option and all of that. So there's different types of questions you can throw in there. You can score the answers yourself for anything that's not something like a multiple choice. If it's a short answer, you can add the scores in there from your edit form page. But there are some other features in there that can help students along outside of just a standard typical quiz. So for example, you can set data validations on a question to make sure that students are thinking through their answers. So if it's something like a math question, now you can obviously set it to not let them submit it if the answer they're giving is not a number. But there are also some specifics in there. You can set it where it has to be greater than a certain number, or you can set a character limit or character requirement on it. So for something like a long answer, you can set it to have a minimum of maybe 150 characters to make sure that they are writing explanations in there. Along with that, if you wanted to go even deeper with that kind of idea, you can actually set up different sections and use the multiple choice option of go to a section based on the answer. And you can set it up if you want to use it more as a formative thing to help students learn. If they click on the wrong answer, you can send them to another section of the Google form, maybe with some resources or a video or something to read that will give them that information, and then set it to take them back to that previous question after they've watched that video. So they're getting that real-time, immediate feedback on a question that they've missed, so that they're not waiting maybe a week to get the quiz back. When they've stopped worrying about it and stopped thinking about it, you're giving them the resources to help them learn the information right then and right there. Some other things that are helpful with forms that you can use as a teacher, it will give you graphs for a lot of like the multiple choice questions. So you can see how students did on the question, but then you can also see trends of if a lot of them got it wrong, what was the answer that they more commonly answered. And a lot of your assessment programs are going to have something similar to that, but it is right there in your Google Drive, and you can see it as students are submitting those things. You can export all of this information into Google Sheets, and so you can take something like if you're going to group students based on an assessment you give them, you can use the sorting feature in Sheets that will just go ahead and sort it for you. So if you're looking at maybe an overall score, you can sort it by that overall score. If you're looking at a particular question for a specific lesson, you can group students and sort it by that one question. You can group it by answer or whatever. So it makes sorting and grouping for that individualized instruction a little bit easier. One of the things that I like, and it's also kind of like I mentioned earlier with the immediate feedback, you can set it up to immediately show them how they scored on the quiz to tell them their overall grade. You can also set it up to show them questions that they got correct, the questions that they missed, if you want them to do something with that afterwards. So maybe you give them a quiz and set it up to show them missed questions. And then after they have submitted the form, you can give them some kind of reflection or some kind of assignment based on the questions that they missed. Again, the more immediate the feedback, the more likely they are to learn that information. So it's really, really good about being able to do that. And then the sort of best of all with this is if you are using managed Chromebooks attached to your district or to your school, there is a locked mode for Google Forms to prevent them from opening new tabs. So if all your students are on a school managed Chromebook, you can set the option when you create the form to go into locked mode so that when they log on to the form, they are automatically in like a full screen locked mode. They cannot open new tabs. And it's just that little bit more accountability measure to make sure that they are not browsing through Google to find answers to your questions. But then, of course, another workaround for that is to give them questions that they can't just Google the answer to. But that's a different story, different episode. Another thing that I've used Google Forms for to help me get organized is to help with some just administrative types of tasks that I do. I find myself pretty disorganized when it comes to keeping up with information like that. So Google Forms has really been beneficial for me to keep up with some of those things. So just a quick little rundown, some things that I've used it for. I've used it for book checkouts. So I have a classroom library that I'll let students borrow books from. Normally, I would just write their name and the title down on a sticky note. And then, of course, I would lose the sticky note because I would have 100 sticky notes everywhere. Instead, I've just got, a Google form that I can type their name. I can type the book title and book number if it's a class set of something. And then I've got it right there in a spreadsheet. And then I can just delete it when they turn it in. I've also used it for assignment checklists. If it's a multi-step assignment that they're working on, they can just go into the Google form and check off which step they've completed as they complete it. Helps them keep up with it. Helps me see where they are. I've used it for goal setting a lot of times at each grading period and just have them go in and set maybe one writing goal and one reading goal for my class. And then it's all right there in a sheet for me so I can look back at it throughout the semester and check in with them on that. And one of the things that I've really used that I like is using it for our Saturday school. We give students opportunities to come on Saturday to make up missed work or missed seat time and all that. And it always was a huge time killer for me to look through, type up for each student who's registered, what all they need to do, what all they need to work on. So what I did instead is I took Google Forms and then I used a Google Sheets add-on called Autocrat, which will take a template Google Doc and then fill in the information that you have in a Google Sheet. So essentially what I do is I create a Google form that has a field for the student name for the class that they're in, but then I create a checklist option and then I will just put a list of all the various assignments that we've done in that grading period. And then when I get ready to put together their work, all I have to do is put their name, the class in, and then check the assignments that are missing or need to be redone. And then I run the Autocrat program, and it will create a Google Doc, a separate page for each student with all of the work that they need to complete. So I'm not having to do a ton of copying and pasting and retyping assignment names and all of that. So using forms to help with those simple administrative tasks has been a real big time saver for me. The next thing I like to use forms for is to track progress, using it for progress monitoring. And that will be different for different classes, but essentially you can set up a standard form that students would fill in each time you complete something. So we can use it to track scores on assessments and quizzes. And then again, it's in a Google Sheet, so you can use that to kind of compare all of the different scores. And then there are things you can do in Google Sheets like color coding or pivot tables or creating graphs to show the progress. So if we are answering quiz scores every time we take a quiz, we can put together a little sparkline graph to show if we're trending upward, about the same, downward, and then we can take that and fix whatever we need to with it. You could also use it, kind of like I mentioned earlier, to track progress on a specific project to make sure students are making adequate progress and managing their time well. Really, anything that's kind of long term is a great way to use Google Forms and just track students' progress across the semester, across the year. Now, the last two are some of my, I think, personal favorites that I like to use Google Forms for. The first of which is for surveys and feedback. I use Google Forms a lot to get information from my students. And basically, it just helps me quickly collect information and organizes it for me. If I have 120 to 150 students who fill out a paper survey for me, I have to flip through all of those. But instead, I can stick it in a Google form, and then I can look at the columns to see any kind of specific information. So a few different ways that I use this, and I'll have some links to some ones that I use if you want to check those out in the show notes. I do an intro survey at the beginning of the year, and that's just a overview of the student to help me get to know them, the kind of stuff that they're interested in, where they roughly sit in class, if English is a subject that they enjoy, if it's not, and ways that I can try to help them at the beginning of the year. And the one that I use is one that I have modified from John Meehan. So if you heard him several episodes ago, I got the one that I'm using now off of his website, and then I've kind of modified it to my specific needs in my class. So that's one that you can definitely check out, and it's a great kind of intro survey to do. On the opposite end of it, I like to use an end of the semester survey or end of the year survey to just track what's been working and what hasn't been working in class. So I might do something like list some of the various apps and websites that we've used and give them a 1 to 5 scale to rate how much it has helped them or how comfortable they feel with doing it, with using it, or anything like that. And then I can see little graphs to see what apps are really engaging students, what apps I might need to go back and teach them how to use better. We can do the same thing with skills, have them do some self-assessment, self-rating kind of things where they'll rate themselves on a variety of skills to give me some ideas of anything that might need some more work on. And then one of my favorite ways to use this for feedback is a weekly reflection that I do. So this is something that I got from one of my colleagues in the district. I can't remember exactly who it was, but it's a weekly thing that I will give them every Friday. And again, I've modified it because the original one I got was geared toward elementary school students. So I've modified it a little bit more for my high school students. But basically, I just have them sit and reflect every Friday on what we did that week, what we might be doing next week. And it's questions like, what did you learn this week? Rate your work ethic for this week and why. What was good? What was tough? What are some things that I should know? And that has been really helpful for me in class because it has given me information that students may not just walk up and tell me, and then I check back in on them the following week. So if I see something that is a concern, I will follow up with them the following week. I have them set goals. So there's a question on there that says, next week I want to be better at. And I will look through those and I will follow up with them and ask them about it the following week. How you doing? All right, you said you were going to do this better this week. Are you making progress in that? So it's a really good one that not only has helped track the students, but it's been a really good way of developing relationships with them as well. So that's something that I've really, really enjoyed using. So yeah, using it for surveys, for feedback, to get that information from students. And again, they all do it in a 2 to 3 minute segment, and then I don't have to collect it because it's all on a Google Sheet right there for me. Now, the last thing that I use forms and sheets for might be my favorite because I think it is the ultimate time saver, and that is parent contacts. So what I do is I'll use a mail merge in Google Sheets to send out individualized mass emails. And it takes some time to load on the front end, but as I've done that, it has saved me a lot of time after it. Once I've got it set up, it only takes just a few seconds, enough time to fill out the form, and then it will take care of everything for me. So what I'll do is I'll create a template email. So for example, maybe something like tardy notifications. Sometimes it's hard for me to remember who I've contacted, who I haven't. So I'll set up a template email for tardy notifications. Hey, student has 3 tardies to my class. Next tardy is going to be a detention. Please make sure that they're getting to class on time. Encourage them to be on time. I'll create that template email and then look through and figure out what are the information fields I need. So student name, the parent name, parent email, all that kind of stuff. And that becomes the information fields that go into my Google form. Then I will set that up in the form. So I'll have, the place for the parent name, for the student name, for the email address, and then I will set up the mail merge to trigger on any kind of form submit. So essentially what I would do is, after I've got all that set up, is if I have a student that hits their 3rd tardy, I open up the form, I fill out the information, and since the mail merge is already set up, then as soon as I hit submit form, it's going to create that email and it's going to send it for me. And so I know Gmail has template emails that you can set up. But again, if I use a template email there, I'm having to click on the email. Then I have to go in and delete or add all the information to it. And one of the things that I have found when it comes to copying and pasting stuff for emails, I don't know about you, but I always mess it up. I always get the wrong students connected to the wrong parents, and it just gets confusing for me. So when I can set it up in a Google form like I do, it helps me, again, to stay organized, and also saves me a little bit of time. So those are some of my favorite ways to use Google Forms. Google Forms are great. I've become a huge fan of forms and sheets over the last couple of years. And the great thing is you can make them as simple or as complex as you want. If you just want a simple 3-question quiz, it doesn't take long to do that. But you can get complex and creative in the sense of something like a choose your own adventure story where you're having students click through a list of choices and coming out with some kind of outcome in the end. So there's lots of stuff. It's a very versatile app that you can use. And if you haven't really tried Google Forms much, maybe you don't know a whole lot about it, or some people will get a little bit intimidated by it, check it out. Just start simple and work your way up to it. It's a great time saver, and it's a great way to get things done in class. So hopefully that gave you some new ideas of some things that you can use in class, as well as leveling up what you are doing and trying out some new things. So I'm going to consider this boss battle won, and we're going to take a little break and come back with some feedback and your 8-Bit Crew question of the week. before we get into this week's question of the week, I did want to take some time to look at some feedback from last week's episode. In fact, Steve Capone, who was on last week's episode, responded to the question of the week, which was essentially, how's your year going? What's going well? And so he responded, here's what's going well: designing units that give students choice and are agnostic about whether students are virtual or in person. It's nimble enough that when the city shut down yesterday, my students still knew what to do. And that's awesome. I followed up with Steve, and apparently they had some really high winds come through the city and knocked a bunch of trees down, power went out and all that kind of stuff. But it's really cool that he was able to design things that even in circumstances like that, when things kind of fall apart, there are still things in place where students can continue working on assignments if they have the ability to. And especially now with a lot of students being virtual, that's a really cool thing. So, Steve, way to go with being innovative and putting some of that stuff together. If you missed last week's episode with Steve, definitely make sure you check that out. He's got some great ideas and some great things that he's trying out with his classes. So for this week's question of the week, this one's pretty simple, straightforward, dealing with Google Forms. What are some ways that you use Google Forms in your classroom? I talked about a few, but I know a lot of you out there have some really innovative things that you're doing with Google Forms. So what are some things that you do with Google Forms? If you haven't used Google Forms, maybe your question would be, what's one thing that you want to try to do with Google Forms? Make sure you respond to me on Twitter. You can use the hashtag 8bitcrew, or you can leave a comment in the show notes on the 8-Bit Instructor blog at 8bitinstructor.com. Well, that will just about wrap up this episode. Hey, if you have something that you want to share with the rest of the 8-Bit Crew community and would like to come on, reach out to me. I'd love to get some more folks on here that have some ideas of things that they are trying. I do have a few more episodes coming up over the next few months and working on some other ones. But if you have an idea, if you have something that you've tried before, or just want to come on the show and share something, let me know. Thanks so much for listening, for taking time out of your busy schedule to level up your learning a little bit. If you enjoy this show, make sure to subscribe to it on your favorite podcast app. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter. I'm at Comic Socks, and you can use the hashtag 8bitcrew. And more importantly, get out there and tell others, and let's build up this community of educators who want to improve our craft and create authentic experiences for our students. If you'd like to support the show, you can visit my Patreon page at www.patreon.com/8bitinstructor. I've got some pretty cool stickers on there too. Keep getting out there, trying new things, leveling up your learning, and until next week, keep your swords sharp and your shields strong. Thanks so much for listening. Be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and check out the 8-Bit Instructor YouTube channel for EdTech tips and tutorials, as well as other content on my website, 8bitinstructor.com. And of course, don't forget to follow me on Twitter at ComicSocks and use the hashtag 8bitcrew. See you next week.